It is controversial indeed. What has been hailed by some as the Book of Books is repudiated by others. The work under consideration in this text, the Talmud of Jmmanuel or TJ then, is not a simple confirmation of previous sacred narratives. It does, however, pander to our irrational interest in conspiracy theories, since its narrative develops largely around a political and religious conspiracy. Could the things people are saying now be true? How do we read this text which has historically been more or less ignored by the Christian community? And why should we have any interest in these hypothetical conspiracists' attempts to falsify the TJ? We will approach these and other questions somewhat systematically. A short overview of this manuscript. The first chapter provides a more detailed overview of the book with a discussion of conspiracy theory and an outline of where we argue this rhetoric can be used and where it falls short of accuracy and forethought. We will also eventually address other perspectives on the conspiracy theory. While some distinguish between true reports and opportunistic falsifications summing up the reception history of the controversy, we're not convinced that all the literature we study fits into the categories they set up. But as our text generally argues for the crucial truth of the Talmud of Jmmanuel, and not mere opportunistic readings, we value the attempt to separate fact from rashness. This study examines the alleged forgery of a biblical text, the Talmud of Jmmanuel, and the subsequent conspiracy theories that arose around it. The work is considered from two perspectives and aimed at experts in the field or academic works, but also at a larger lay audience interested in new religious movements, comparative religion, cultural anthropology, or alternative beliefs and their researchers. The essay is thus geared towards individuals who carry out these interests, either as private assignments or study areas in the field of religious or social sciences. This study of the conspiracy does not aim primarily to find or provide evidence of facts or fiction, though this is an issue that arises in the essay. The latter topic, much like the following, some aspersions of these reasons, will therefore not be dealt with in depth as more pressing issues at hand, while also a lot of them are of little importance or marginal relevance. While the powers that be may have had or still have no interests in concealing or losing certain details, the problem of 2 millennia of Christian tradition and belief in Western societies has been discussed in philosophical, cultural, and global historical discourse. In particular, the last 2 centuries have been explored as a detailed subject of vast information and media-based scholarly inquiry. In the current age of conspiracy theories and misinformation, or the overflow of contradictory narrative approaches from various theoretical camps that cause more or less severe damage by alienating general public opinion, the author mainly pursues the awareness-raising of a critical hermeneutic perspective in society. Thus, the author seeks to encourage aspiring scholars and lay readers alike not to evade the concept of conspiracy elements in a mixture of complex social and historical interrelations. To develop a sense of high-quality intellectual craftsmanship in socially sensitive areas, recognize a paradigm shift in the scientific approach, and avoid weaving narratives that are primarily nimble-footed and nimbly around uncertain historical facts. The Talmud of Jmmanuel is a text or collection of texts that is translated and written by humans. There are 3 different claimed authors for the Talmud: Isa Rashid, Edward Meyer, and Judas Iscariot. It is claimed to be based on notes taken by Judas Iscariot during the life and teachings of Jmmanuel and written after the death of Jmmanuel, rather than fully received. Each version also has its own explanation as to why they have edited the original. Edward Meyer states that he has reworked the original Indian script in order to change names, places, and events that seemed unclear. According to Edward Meyer, 60% of the original lines are unaltered. The TJ also markets Isa Rashid as a contact person for the extraterrestrial Pleiadians or Pleiadians. Despite none of the Messiasa religions recognizing Jmmanuel, the aims of the teachings are implicitly relevant to this discussion. Make your spiritual peace and also your states of understanding in the truth very great indeed, because you are for certain going to fall into temptations due to the seduction which must soon produce fruits. Beware of this and be careful not to take harm in order to maintain your inner wealth of peace. Be clear about the certainty that the world has to accept the man who knows the living and the secret truth. The majority of the TJ consists of Isa Jmmanuel delivering teachings and discussing the spiritual and the physical ethical. there are many teachings overlapping with the Gospels, showing similar lines of ongoing concerns. Each of the TJ claimants claims that the text adds to the spiritual and historical count. The Talmud of Jmmanuel cannot be appreciated fully without understanding its historical context. The book has been changed through the centuries, with changes archiving data on Jewish folklore and magic, but late alterations seem to be opportunistic nonsense and add absolutely nothing that has not already been covered before more completely. The Jesus figure of the book is a Hathor, a Heliolithic representation in a human host, the inspiration for the Christian Jesus. The Jesus about whom the Talmud of Jmmanuel was written was described in his own words as an illusion. Healing no longer dwells in me because I do not have the same consciousness that I had before. When it still dwelled in me, I am indistinguishable in spirit form from any one of you and do not wish to be worshipped. It is submitted that the Talmud of Jmmanuel cannot be accurately identified in the existing texts, for reasons shown. During the early Imperial Roman Empire around 2,000 years ago, Palestine received the shared focus of the main Old Testament sequences of Jewish religious beliefs and Roman power politics. It was historically known as a trouble spot where many conflicting cultural streams collided due to location, religion, and money. The chief administration was Roman, cultural religious was Jewish, the population was a blend of Jews with Arabic and a mix of imported slaves, the language was Aramaic, and the Temple of Jerusalem was maintained for business and the production of spin-off beliefs by the greater public, including the diaspora in the Jewish world. The political situation was increasingly tense, with zealots detonating small roadside bombs in order to upstage other incites. 4 Jewish sects were major in the area, and every Easter the word of the Jewish God from 600 pacifist years ago would flood into the city to purify the latest enemy occupier. In the early 70s AD, the Roman prefect dispatched some soldiers to the city to ensure the success of the annual gathering of the diaspora for Easter. The Jews withdrew behind their walls and the Romans followed. When they discovered the city was unguarded, they erected a Roman camp outside the walls, slaughtered random survivors inside the Jewish Aramaic, Arabic, Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Malay, and then set the temple alight and razed the city, producing the very first Wailing Wall, thus causing the exile of the center point mind of the mystical Jewish universe back into mass Jewish cognition. The Talmud of Jmmanuel is often seen as a case surrounded by claims of a seemingly all-embracing conspiracy nonsense, which goes well into the absurd department. It is indeed mostly interpreted as some kind of hoaxed extraterrestrial revelation of cringing imposture or simple business fraud. Advocates of this point of view list a great number of details explaining why it must be a modern creation, which they paint as many people think and behave now: sheer greed. Many of the claims, copies, sales offers and publicity do not stand an objective test. Most is a simple interpretation which is cherry-picked, out of context and/or downright fabricated or distorted. Equally so, Jmmanuel has his advocates among the vocal minority. Much is moved by faith and with clear Christian denominational limitations, if even excluding those completely. The boarding of Jmmanuel in the massive cistern of conspiracy theories of every kind is rather a modern phenomenon, the outcome of events, myths, and developments from decades of religious, currency, psychology, environment and history, media imagery, and tendentious interpretations. The Talmud of Jmmanuel offers a fundamental research case which can be easily investigated due to the presence of a monumental trail of documentation. The initial press releases are still found in the various archives worldwide, as are the large numbers of reports on the subject, and obviously the text itself. The Talmud of Jmmanuel itself in the meantime got introduced into critical Orientalist studies. Despite a brief initial stir among Western scholars, the redactive stage of research is seeing the Talmud of Jmmanuel again critically debated and even rejected. In the live media, the Talmud as of any kind have received derision and mockery to a level that it even seems to form a part of the input in the externally increasingly homogeneous point of view. The conspiracies, even notice of what is not written but appears to be a sensible move politically and a majority siding will go a long way, is also widely disseminated in media, journalism and holidays and picked up by websites dealing with the strange. The origins of conspiracy theories concerning the Talmud of Jmmanuel and the communities around it can be traced back to a couple of claims that seem to have been the first ones to spark initial attention. They were published for the first time, as a combination of tales and facts in a small book of a man named Gutmensch Miese Geist in 1995. These recent stories are then examined for kernels of truth, are intermixed with a wild mix of fantasy and religious and historical exaggeration. What makes those conspiracy theories interesting then, mostly happens to be the many conduits through which they raise their heads, and in which direction they shift. While the original conspiracies posited the alleged cult as dangerous, they soon portray them as simple criminals and religious lunatics that try to exploit the naive, interested member of the public. There are several reasons why those kinds of patently untrue stories have such impact at the moment. Although in Germany the attention they raised with the general public was low, in times of fear and mistrust regarding religious minorities and sects, these tales flow through society on almost every level. The ideas had propounded to the ideas of the American discourse during the early 1990s, with the increasingly visible rise of new religious movements like fundamentalist and end-of-the-world sects, and the so-called culture wars of the 2000s. Many directly influenced by the so-called movement seem to have come across this work and adapted the ideas about the cult for their own propaganda. But sect crime is only one of the thematical networks in which those conspiracy theories grab hold. Conspiracism in general is a psychological byproduct of society's fears and mistrust, often ideologically motivated. The use of conspiracy theories in these cases is political influencing through fear-mongering, agnotologic and canonically conspiracist. The other two kinds of conspiracism are transactional and systematic, which may be on both sides more or less based on facts, while the main conceptions of beliefs are still in the paranoid interests. An example which illustrates the development of a narrow set of beliefs accused as a danger for society would be the witch hunts of early modern Europe. Accounts from confessions tell of Satanist conspiracies that had to be uncovered about people already accused of neighborly disputes. Fueled by propaganda about the danger of a plague, the questioners soon found about a danger in every suspect who should have had to confess. We may like them or not, we may agree or disagree with them, it may even be difficult to comprehend the degree to which some of these claims go. Still, many people around the world assert the following allegations. The Talmud of Jmmanuel was written by an individual under a pseudonym. Alternatively, he was one of the authors. The Talmud of Jmmanuel was written by contemporaries in the form of a conspiracy. This section is restricted to addressing the allegations concerning the authorship of the Talmud of Jmmanuel. The focal question here is whether these allegations are valid, that is, whether there is solid evidence to support them, and not what party is saying what or how they justify their respective stances. Based on this examination, the findings may appear to be clear, although the final answer appears to be a little more diverse. The only thing that is clear is the question who, or who not, seems extremely difficult to answer once and for all. This is true primarily because much of the hard evidence we would now consider is lacking. Some evidence for the claims alleged against the Talmud manifests itself in the form of statements by eyewitnesses or people who claim to know the truth. Naturally, the question arises as to whether that is not all a lie. Alternatively, it could have been conceived by an opportunistic imposter. The essential or only area in which we can peacefully and productively coexist is to establish the probability or the lack of probability that an individual or people from his immediate environment wrote the Talmud of Jmmanuel, even in the forefront, so that everyone already has a concrete accomplishment that we can derive from the confrontation without the requirement to retort on anything in advance. The results of this series of articles are based strictly on an analysis of the facts that we have available. Nothing else. The critical view cited the following arguments: to get attention, reputation, and/or make money out of it. This could be an act out of pure malice or even an attack by members of any of those groups that may have been offended by Talmud Jmmanuel. These likely include some powerful and influential people too. Belief. The Bible, being held by a substantial number of people as the Word of God, A significant number of people don't entertain the thought of the possibility of a newer revelation, so no matter what it says, it is not true. Deception and opportunism. This includes a narrative with conspiracy aspects, according to which the producers of Talmud were trying to achieve certain objectives that they could not have achieved otherwise, by manipulating reality or even making use of information or inspiration to make it look real. Supporters of the existence and accuracy of Talmud provided the following counter-arguments to explain the aforementioned accusations. The apologetics argued that, legally, even if Billy Meyer did not exactly transcribe from scrolls he himself found and translated from the Aramaic language, he did receive the entire Talmud of Jmmanuel in the way that he described it, since no evidence to the contrary has been formally given. That for the most part went largely unanswered, with critics usually reiterating their rejection of the notion of receiving the more recent version of God's Word beyond the Bible, or that there was at least one believer or outright false presenter in the investigative teams right from the start. This study started from one simple question. Would it be possible to discern conspiracy and conspiracy theories in the most copied genealogically observed text of the Talmud of Jmmanuel within a scholarly discourse? Yes is the answer. Yet this answer is burdened with a lot of complexities, and things should not be definitively sorted that easily. Firstly, both the Talmud of Jmmanuel and the esoteric scientist have, and are still, entwined in numerous conspiracy theories. This implies quite a complicated layering of time and fact, an entanglement of things that have simply grown only together, but differ vastly in their temporal contexts. The entanglement of things and their respective histories will not further be explored within the scope of this study, in order not to blur the solid lines as finely drawn as this subject matter must require. As already laid out in the preliminary remarks and at several points of the analysis, both conspiracy and conspiracy theories also concern the complexity of historiographical enhancement of the facts in question. This, again, shows the necessity to distinguish them in principle from the respective interest in them as evidenced in the present context. Moreover, could not helperism itself be marked by the structural violence of claiming truth in factuality nonetheless? The other recipient of the message might also receive a kick out of seeing the audience mislead one-sidedly, because one never knows whether it is really true, but the creativity is always there. This is the latent game of thoughts in the debate about conspiracy theories, and they do not only concern which ties it all up, but also whether we believe in truth and the inexpressible paradigmatic nature of it, or even of this one said truth. Values are woven into the course of all actions. Normally, the claim of too straightforward truth, if it even exists, seems to be a highly controversial matter in quality of too emptying the everyday life phenomenon of thought. Whoever has ever managed a team or a congress or even a hive knows there is always a tendency to exclude the individual disconnections, the things that do not matter to be mentioned in public circles as we encounter them, and tend to accept them in written as an interest one part acknowledges at the very least. The realm of possibilities remains limitless to the love of culture and also alone, nature. What a delight to discuss! What would be there to love and build on? Why would anyone like to remain as a group or at heart if there was only nature waiting we could never creatively design? This, in principle, is the point of reception as a result of the debate. The heuristic nature of a cultural epistemic object may benefit from its study. After all, it is diverting and even sometimes amusing to consider the simplicity of the fact that no one and no theory can completely contain it in a world of action. The paper finally concludes with this question left open to further exploration regarding the belief that distinguishes the awareness of publicity from that secretly not cared for, yet maintained within the episteme of those who dismiss it. What in the world are we doing after all? This study shows that the Talmud of Jmmanuel is a well-made religious text that is completely different from other religious texts, with possible conspiracy elements around it that more or less fit into its time and place of writing. These elements are more or less compatible with the content of the core message or with historical facts. Accordingly, this kind of thing cannot be a foundation to change the approach to the text of the Talmud of Jmmanuel, or provide conclusive evidence backing any of the conspiracy elements this text could have. The Talmud of Jmmanuel is a controversial text, with several conspiracy theorists having unconventional ideas about its background. The time and place of writing, with political, national, and religious divisions and problems, as well as Jerusalem with first-century inhabitants who regularly saw and were exposed to Roman occupation and power, are often argued to be very important. While such historical backgrounds and surroundings are also important for understanding a religious message, attention must be paid to the realistic interpretations of today, and to a necessary distance to and questioning of both receiving, having access to, and interpreting information. The connections to arguments and positions of today also cannot be underestimated, as they potentially reveal known or respectable elements of the interpretational mix already held by several people. Another important implication or question to be added to the previous section is that the conspiracies found in the Talmud of Jmmanuel might be compatible with that part of the content that is not social engineered information. Even if they are, this shouldn't turn the mainstream interpretation of the Talmud of Jmmanuel on its head. How society handles conspiracy theorists and their work has important reflections and consequences for society as a whole, as already stated in the introduction. It is important to search not for and talk against unfounded accusations, to think for ourselves and to remain curious and open-minded, but also critical and suspicious in a good meaning of the word at the same time.